On va redémarrer avec une première keynote sur la supply chain tout de suite, l'importance d'une chaîne d'approvisionnement de la pub numérique, sécurisée, transparente et axée sur la protection de notre vie privée. Une keynote en anglais, keynote in English, donc I will call to join me on stage Anthony Katsur. Please join me to talk about the supply, the CEO of IAB Tech Lab. Welcome, Anthony. We listen to you. You have a microphone here? Thank you. It's okay. That's good. Yes.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon after a wonderful lunch. What's that? Use the mic? Okay. Well, thanks for joining after a wonderful lunch. The topic today is really about what I call the ever-evolving supply chain, and the importance in creating transparency in our industry to support a progressive global ecosystem. The supply chain we operate off of, many of the companies in this room, while you may be based in France or you may be based in other areas of Europe, some of you may be based in North America or Asia Pacific, the internet is inherently global. The audiences you reach, whether those are French expats in other countries, your reach is global. So the necessity to create transparency in a truly global ecosystem, a digital advertising ecosystem, is absolutely critical for the health of the industry, for both publishers, for advertisers, for consumers, and what I'll talk about in a few minutes, frankly, the planet, given what's happening from a green and zero carbon footprint perspective. But I think we should start with a little bit of a history lesson, or kind of going back to the fundamentals of the supply chain and looking how that's evolved and how Tech Lab, in partnership with many of you in this room and people watching online, how that's evolved in partnership with feedback from all of you, and Tech Lab stewarding a lot of technical standards to foster that transparency. Pardon. Oh, the good old days. When it was all so simple. It was a browser, an ad server, an ad tag, an SSP, you had a bid request and a bid response, and there was a buyer behind that, and going through their DSP, like, wasn't it oh so simple and easy? Well, the supply chain has clearly evolved. It's become much more complex, much more advanced, but that's all in the interest of driving the needs of both publishers, advertisers, and consumers. So how has it evolved? Well, we entered very early on in our industry. We entered what I call the age of fraud, and that led to really kind of what I think of as the first phase of the supply chain's evolution in the industry. The age of fraud, and what I call the age of fraud and malware. And that led to some key initiatives, which I think everyone is intimately familiar with. The development of ads.txt was an absolutely critical development for the industry to create greater transparency to combat fraud. Quickly added to that was sellers.json, and then we added the supply chain object. Supply chain object is a absolutely, I think, fascinating development, which frankly I think is under adopted across the ecosystem. I think greater adoption of the supply chain object just creates further impediments to fraud in the industry. So I would say it is incumbent, candidly, on buyers to demand use of the supply chain object in the actual ecosystem. And then, whoops, did not mean to go back. And then the creation, of course, of the demand chain object, purpose-built really to prevent malware and spyware, and actually have valid buyers behind that, and complemented by buyers.json as well. We see, there's been great adoption of ads.txt and sellers.json. That's great for the industry. There's been decent adoption of the supply chain object. I think there's definitely room to improve. And then the demand chain object in buyers.json is woefully under-adopted. In meetings I've been having here today, and speaking with some folks, they were asking, well, how does the tech lab drive adoption? Well, we're not the internet police. I've said this before. I think maybe I said this at this event last year. We're not the internet police. We don't go knocking on people's doors and say, you must adopt this, right? This is adopted by the industry. Our technical standards are adopted based on their merit to the industry. We can't force adoption. But I would encourage any advertisers, any agencies in the audience, or those watching online, any supply chain that's not leveraging this holistically is a supply chain that you are buying at your own risk. The buy side needs to demand adoption of these technical standards to mitigate fraud and create greater economic transparency as well in the supply chain. There's all these initiatives around, where's my dollar going? 45 cents on the dollar or 45 cents on the euro is going to, we don't know where, ad tech middlemen. It's the ad tech tax, which is not a term I prescribe to. But where is that 45 cents going? Well, if these objects or these technical standards were used in concert, you would have a lot more visibility into where that's going. So again, it is incumbent on the ecosystem to drive adoption of these things. So this is really phase one, and continue to evolve, of our supply chain to create economic transparency, to create supply chain transparency to combat fraud. And then there is what I call the issue of our time, the existential issue, the existential challenge of our time. It's privacy. Consumers are speaking with their voice. Governments around the globe are speaking on the issues of privacy and addressability in the digital advertising ecosystem. We are in the very early stages of this game. Europe, of course, being ahead really of the rest of the world in the area of privacy, but other markets such as the US, India, Japan, Brazil, Australia, Europe really leading the way here when it comes to consumer privacy. It has only just begun. And there is plenty more on the way where we are looking at a patchwork of privacy regulations around the globe. So we've entered now the age of privacy, and that resulted in yet another supply chain evolution. Creation of the CMP, the TCF, developed by IAB Europe in partnership with the Tech Lab. The recently announced Global Privacy Platform, which is intended to address consent signaling across multiple jurisdictions. For example, if I live in the state of California and I am vacationing in the lovely city of Paris, France, sipping my espresso and reading the news on CNN.com, I need to be compliant both with the state of California and with GDPR regulations, or I risk serious financial and legal penalties. The GPP is built to streamline that type of compliance, that type of compliance to regulations. The accountability platform, which we will be releasing for public comment, we will be releasing the specification for public comment in January. This is coming next month. That is a means by which we can have a normalized, standardized form of privacy compliance data exhaust for self-audit, government regulatory audit, other trade group audits to ensure that consent flags are actually being obeyed throughout the supply chain. Opt-outs are actually being adhered to. Changes to the right to deletion, right to be forgotten is actually being propagated throughout the supply chain. That's the purpose behind the accountability platform. And then with the age of privacy, supply chain transparency evolved with mobile, with the introduction of extensive mobile supply, both in the form of app and web, and the Tech Lab, and again, in partnership with all of our members, many of you in the room, developed app-ads.text. So another robust evolution of the supply chain. And the key here when we talk about transparency, this is really about creating transparency for consumers, for government regulators, and for our industry to ensure that we are adhering to and we're doing the best we can for consumers to maintain their privacy. And now we're entering a new stage of the industry, and we announced this at a Tech Lab event 3 weeks ago. And this is the age of advanced television. So many screens, so many viewing opportunities. I mean, I'm sure any of you with friends and family have all experienced this. You know, there's appointment viewing with the family, and you know, that's me and my kids. You know, I'm sitting on the couch and I don't know what the hell to watch, and you know, my kids are watching something on their phones or their laptops. We've entered the age of advanced television, and I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. But what that has resulted in is introducing television into the Tech Lab ecosystem, into the digital advertising ecosystem. But I'm inclusive of not just CTV. When Tech Lab thinks of advanced TV, we think of linear, we think of satellite, we think of over-the-air broadcast, we think of connected television, we think of all sorts of streaming, video. That has introduced new signaling, which I'm going to share with you in a few moments. We announced this new signaling framework, which is intended to support all of those television environments, all of them, legacy television, as well as connected TV or OTT, if you would call it that, using what's called the A335 watermark. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But another huge evolution of the supply chain intended to create transparency, auditability, universal reconciliation across all of these channels. And then something else we're going to be entering going into 23 and beyond. And I think this has the air of developments in privacy. And this is really the green revolution or the zero carbon initiatives that we as an industry are taking on. And we are in the process, I just had a roadmap review of what the Tech Lab Green Roadmap will look like in 2023. And you know, here we've got everything we've done to date and things that are coming in 2023 for sure. But then, you know, what does the supply chain look like? What does a green supply chain look like? You know, do we start to incorporate carbon accounting at an ads.txt and sellers.json level? Do we enhance the RTB protocol to act as a transport vehicle to actually be able to report carbon data on a per bid request basis? I don't know. But again, this is another key area of where we develop as an industry. You know, I don't like to say Tech Lab did it, because Tech Lab, we're just a steward of these for you. You know, Tech Lab doesn't necessarily own anything. You, the industry, own it. We steward it. We help develop it. We foster consensus and agreement around technical standards to do this. So what does the age of green hold for the industry? I'm not sure. We'll be announcing some of the things that we'll finalize as part of a green roadmap towards the end of January. But further evolution of the supply chain and creating transparency in order to support a greener industry that we, you know, to better manage our carbon footprint as an ecosystem. Our work is not done. We will always be climbing this mountain. The supply chain will constantly be evolving. Tech Lab standards will constantly be evolving. So what does that mean for 2023? Let's get into some nuts and bolts of what our 2023 strategy looks like. In privacy, supporting new markets in need of a consent framework, providing the industry with tools to handle what we call post-transaction consumer rights, the ability for consumers to access, modify, and delete their data throughout the supply chain. How do we propagate that signal throughout the supply chain? That's a tough one to solve. Improving the security of privacy signals, so signed consent strings. How do we approach that, and how do we do it in a way where we're not creating fingerprintable surface in the industry? Evaluating EU APD remedies as needed. So working closely with IAB Europe and the other European IABs on how do we continue to deliver, perhaps proactively, remedies against what the APD has ruled. Accommodating new non-jurisdictional signals. So how do we accommodate things like consent signaling in the Brazilian market, consent signaling in the Japanese market, the Australian market. And then the accountability working group, which oversees this accountability platform I've been talking about, is how do we actually roll it out? So the specification will be published in January, and we'll open it for a 60-day public comment period, but then how do we actually drive adoption of that? Is it something that's distributed? Do we do it as an open source project? Does Tech Lab host some accountability data center. That's all to be determined throughout the course of next year and working with our working groups. Finalizing ID sources.json. I want to encourage folks to keep a close eye on that. We quietly released that for public comment last year. That's about to undergo a significant evolution within the Tech Lab working groups based on some internal conversations around data provenance, which is important. Ongoing work in PETs, privacy-enhancing technologies. I believe in my core that privacy-enhancing technologies, and I encourage, we don't have the time in the next 5 minutes that I have allotted to me to go into exactly what privacy-enhancing technologies are. But the simplest way, the very simplest way to think about this is privacy-enhancing technologies is a means by which you can de-identify or anonymize a consumer and then create some encrypted token or identifier that is virtually unreversible engineered to be able to tie it back to any kind of sensitive personal information. That's the concept of PETs. That's high-level conceptually of PETs. And it involves multiple practices from cryptography, machine learning, k-anonymity practices, secure multi-party compute. These are all things that PETs are comprised of, but I would encourage all of you, get familiar with this. And if you haven't joined our PETs working group, we have an active working group on this. I encourage you to join the PETs working group because there's a lot of work going on in there. And then in addition to that, our clean rooms, establishing standards around clean rooms. I get approached weekly at this point on, what is a clean room? I'm talking to company X, they're a clean room. They're not a clean room, they're just a server-to-server matching company. There are core technical standards that should be expected of a clean room. We're working on defining those standards. We're working on defining standards around clean room interoperability. Our goal was originally to release those at the end of this year. We've got some more work to do with the working groups. They've given us some really good feedback on how we need to further flesh these out. Our goal is to release our clean room standards in February at our privacy event in February. The addressability working group. We talked about clean room standards. Seller-defined audiences 1.1. We will be iterating on seller-defined audiences. I'm noticing it's starting to pick up traction, certainly in the US. I'm starting to see traction as well as the UK market. We're getting a lot of inquiries around our data transparency standards and around seller-defined audiences in general. So I think 2023 will be the year we actually start to see that take off. Ongoing engagement with the W3C around PETs concepts. So we're an active participant and attendee of the PAT-CG within the W3C. So our goal is to bring probably 2 PETs proposals to the W3C next year. And then advanced TV, and I'm going to dive a bit further into this, but really launching the A335 watermark. The advanced television charter was about solving for 5 key use cases across TV environments. So when I started as Tech Lab CEO in August of last year, many conversations I had with both our Tech Lab board, the IAB board, international IABs is, when is Tech Lab going to really plant a flag in CTV? And the challenges I saw in CTV, which I look as a subset of CTV, are there's a challenge around universal reconciliation. There's a challenge around auditability in terms of how we actually create universal measurement across CTV environments. There's a challenge around audience interoperability. The buyer may be using one data source for new homeowners. The seller may be using another data source. So how do we create interoperability between those environments? Fraud. We have real concerns around fraud in CTV. And then this last one here, I'll get to in a moment. When I looked at these 4 and I started to really dig into what the challenges the CTV environment is facing, I picked my head up and I said, wait a minute, these are the challenges that a fragmented television environment face. Linear, cable, satellite, over-the-air broadcast, CTV or OTT devices. Why can't we build a framework that, as linear TV audiences continue to shift over to streamed audiences over time and budgets follow, why can't we build a framework that we can then take with us in this new world of connected television? And that's where we came up with the Advanced TV Charter. I choose that term very carefully because it's not just for CTV. It's really about a cross-television environment framework to create universal addressability and reconciliation and audit across those environments. For any buyers in the room or those watching online, wouldn't it be lovely to just hand your agency or just hand your DSP my budget and say, I just want to find these consumers, and I want to be able to frequency cap and target across television. Don't care what the environment is. I just want to be able to do that across TV. And then the ability to streamline that reconciliation in a single report. That's what universal reconciliation is all about, and that's our charter. That's what we're shooting for. This concept of frame-accurate replacement really sets up the basis for an impression-based TV market, which is becoming very popular in the US. I think that's early here in Europe, but it's becoming very popular in the US. So frame-accurate replacement was another key consideration for the charter. It's built on what we call the A335, which is an open video watermark standard. The A335 was originally developed by Sony. It was donated to the ATSC, which is a television industry trade group based in the US. And then the equivalent of that here in Europe and other markets is known as the DVB. So there is an open video watermark standard as well that's championed by the DVB. We didn't invent this. What's amazing is like we looked at something in the legacy television industry and we said, that'll work for all environments. Let's foster that. Let's adopt that. Let's drive that. See, these are the markets where ATSC is, and DVB big in Europe, South Africa, Russia, and other markets, basically international markets. ATSC is really big in the Americas. In the programmatic supply chain, I think there are three key takeaways here before I close. I know I'm almost at time. is a rather significant change. We had a webinar on this yesterday, Tech Lab did, about how we're going to change the open RTB release process. We are going to move to a more iterative approach to the RTB protocol so we can respond more quickly to the needs of the industry. The current version, the latest version we have out there is 2.6. What we're looking at is moving faster in the forms of specific extensions versus more monolithic big releases. So, is there a 2.7 coming? Maybe. If there is 2.7 perhaps kind of the last major release before we start to move to more kind of point releases or extensions off of that? That's the plan, is how do we actually release these extensions to accommodate fast-moving changes in the industry versus these bigger monolithic RTB releases. And then the last two things, which I think are key takeaways, are ongoing fight against fraud. Authenticated devices. So how do we actually authenticate a device to say that there's really a human behind that? And then authenticated delivery. How do we actually sign the transactions between buyer and sellers? That's another, I think of our fraud approach as building a fence. And those are just two more wires that we put up in the fraud fence, is around authenticated devices and authenticated delivery. And then over there on the left, the last thing to call out, as I mentioned earlier, is how do we actually support green telemetry within the programmatic ecosystem? So what kind of container objects can we create within the programmatic ecosystem to actually capture carbon-based data for us to make buying decisions off of that, us to make planning and investment decisions off. Last but not least is our Open Measurement SDK. Open Measurement SDK, I would argue, is one of the most successful programs ever launched at Tech Lab. It's currently distributed over 3 billion devices globally. We recently released Open Measurement SDK for CTV in September of this year. So it currently works against all Android TV and tvOS devices. We will be rolling it out. To support Samsung and Chromecast, and then also Vizio and LG but towards the end of the year. So wide coverage of a lot of the major television OEMs to bring open measurement that we've used in web and mobile to bring it into CTV so we can have normalized viewability metrics across all screens. So those will be a big development for next year. And then in the Security Foundation Working Group, we're investigating other kind of measurement opportunities within the Open Measurement SDK, which we plan on doing in a modular fashion. So how do we start to use the Open Measurement SDK to go beyond just viewability? And particularly in the age of outcome-based television advertising, which is here today and it's only going to grow, I think there's a need for that, particularly in CTV. But we're going to take a modular approach to that in terms of how we extend the Open Measurement SDK within the CTV environment. Our work is never done. Tech Lab's work is never done. I was telling Nicholas, and I think I've said to a few others, I love what I do. I love what Tech Lab does. I love what we do for this industry. I love this industry. I sleep very well on Friday nights. Our work will never be done. And I'm proud to take this work on. The team is very proud to take this work on. We look forward to getting feedback across the globe. We are not just a US-based organization. Not every great idea comes from Tech Lab. Not every great idea comes out of the US. I encourage input from the entire European market, Asia Pacific market. We are a global technical standard setting body. We are here to serve you, the ecosystem. So any ideas, concepts, feedback, good, bad, and ugly, bring that to Tech Lab. I will respond to it. Our team will get on it. But we're here to serve this industry, and we'll always be working for this industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony.